Hello and welcome to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show. This is a show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I'm super excited because I'm joined by Sangram Vajre. Now Sangram is a 2-time author. He's co-founder at Terminus. He's also a podcast host himself for Flip My Funnel. He is incredibly passionate about what he calls belongship, based on a number of core areas, which we're going to be learning about today. For Sangram, it's very much about making a huge sustainable difference within the world. Positive change, growth, aspirations, and really driving home the impact of what belonging, meaning, and good business means. Welcome to the show, Sangram.
Leila, this is exciting. I'm going to record that part and use that as part of my introduction everywhere we go. So that was fantastic. Thank you.
You're too kind, and you are more an expert than I am, because I listen to a lot of the content you put out, and I just think it's absolutely brilliant. You have so much energy, you have so much passion, and we had a chat beforehand, and actually it really makes me incredibly excited. And obviously everyone wants to hear from you. They don't want to hear from me. So on that note, I wonder whether you could give us a little bit of a synopsis, an introduction into how you came to be multitasking and wearing so many hats with what you do today.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying that to you a minute ago when we were off the air, if you will. But I think people like you and me, we do need things to do that actually motivates us. And what's fascinating about a lot of the things that we do is we don't realize this, but sometimes the other thing that we're doing actually feeds into a new thing that we're trying to do. So I was on my boot camp for workout. My workout instructor, and we're doing it on Zoom right now with everything going on, so not like a physical place anymore. But he would say, all right, now you're done with bicep curls. Now it's a rest period. So go down and give me crunches. I'm like, wait a minute. How is that a rest period? It's crunches. He's like, yeah, because your biceps are now resting. I'm like, huh. So you constantly do stuff. So it doesn't mean for people like you and me in many ways, people looking at, oh my God, how do you write books, how you're doing podcasts, that's daily, how you're running a company. But I think it's almost like if I didn't do one of these two things, I feel I'll have less energy than I have right now. I'll have less learnings than I have right now. So it really is the makeup of, I think, people like you and me right now.
I absolutely concur. You get bored standing still. You are, to a degree, in a nice way, kind of a workaholic, because you're a constant, lifelong learner. And I know from listening to some of your content, you're just so interested and so curious all the time about what is going on around you. And I think you naturally see the opportunities from other opportunities, and before you know it, you're literally on a trajectory to something else, which is exciting. And one question that I have as well, because obviously with the organization that you're running with Terminus, which is very exciting, we'd love to hear more about that. But you started some of your, I don't want to say early days, but you spent a number of years also working within strategic marketing and working for well-known organizations such as Internap and Salesforce. What led you to then make the transition?
Yeah, what's interesting about that question is it really dives into the thing that we were talking about earlier. So my bachelor's and master's is in computer science, which seems completely off than somebody who's writing books on marketing and talking about leadership. And I think this is part of life that I hope people would take from. I think about this as living your story in a way. I think what more and more people and more what I'm trying to do is to just live my story every single day, which means that my story is going to evolve. My story is going to adapt. My story is going to change, and that's okay. I don't, just because I wrote books doesn't mean I will always write books. Just because I did marketing doesn't mean I will always do marketing. And I think the day I realized that it's okay to change, and it's okay to change your mind and decisions around certain things, it just liberated me, Leila. I mean, it just completely liberated me. It just made me feel like, okay, I can do different things. So all these diverse things that I've done has really helped me recognize that I am good at a couple of things and maybe just one thing. And if I can start doing that one thing and then supplement with some of these other areas that make my life more fulfilling, it is a huge honor to figure that out. So for me, it's all about helping figuring out building communities. And wherever I go, I like to build communities with my church, with my with marketing community, with leadership community. I think it all comes down to just this idea of like we are wired to have communities around us, and the more and stronger the community is, the stronger I feel personally.
I absolutely concur, and I think it's so relevant of the current environment that we are living in. Those communities that really allow us to feel part of something that means something. And the famous quote, which I'm sure you've heard, about people not remembering the way, what happened or what you were doing, but actually they always remember the way you made them feel. You are very, very good at that. And I think the communities that you are building and part of, and the communities that really mean something, are the ones that make people feel a certain way, that makes them want to engage over the long term, because it actually, it touches them on an emotional level in addition, and makes them feel they belong.
They belong, and people want to feel like that. And I feel like communities, if I have to say, well, what does it depend upon? What are the things that people need to do? I just discovered in the last maybe 5 years of just doing this over and over again is really just three things: creating trust, creating a safe environment, people feeling that it's safe and that you care. And what's interesting about that notion of creating trust, safety, and care is that you can apply that to your personal life. Like, who wants to be in a house where you don't trust each other, or you don't feel safe, or don't feel cared for? Nobody. Same thing with your teams. If you can create an environment of trust, safety, and care, you will retain your team better. And the same thing extends to the community. If your community is going to trust you, that you're not going to try to just sell them stuff, or if you're going to community is feel like, hey, I can actually have safe conversations where I'll be respected for my difference of opinion, and they feel like you really care about it, you start building on it. So it's really interesting when you started saying that the idea of belonging. I feel like, man, if we can nail these three things, it's not as hard, but these three things in self are very hard to continue to do and foster. And you need people around you that will make sure that you're on the straight and narrow path on that.
You absolutely, sing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, as myself, and I'm sure many of those who also are listening in. But I think it's when you create these safe places and are able to share, and perhaps I think also share in a vulnerable way, which if you don't mind kind of rewinding the clock, I would love to learn a little bit about your early background as well, because I know you started, you did your BS in computer science back in Nagpur, and then came across to America, where you're at the University of Alabama. As you said, you were studying computer science, which I just think is fantastic. And I think, I wonder, is there anything about your early days and your personal life? So you touched on personal pieces there that really inspired you to be as driven as you are now, within what was, almost the corporate world and, the world of kind of wider business almost. Because, I often personally reflect myself, and, I was born in Hong Kong and I was adopted by, amazing white British parents who came across to the UK. And I think, I don't know whether this is similar for yourself, but I always felt quite different. I think, a lot of that was, wanting to prove myself and almost feeling, actually, business, I felt eventually is a place where I belonged and I could make a sustainable difference. But it really drove me in those early days to almost prove myself and want to make something of myself. And I think, leaders like yourself, and I've heard within a lot of your content, is very open and almost vulnerable to a degree, but I think very, very transparent about who you are, what you do, what means something to you, where you came from, all of these kind of things. And so I wonder, did the early or the kind of the young Sangram have an impact in taking you now to where you are, and that fire in your belly, which clearly you have an abundance, to where you are right now?
Now, I appreciate you diving deeper on that. I got a question for you before I go in. Were you the only daughter that they adopted, and do you have other siblings in the house as well?
Yes. So my And I mustn't have spent too long on this because actually, Sangram, this is absolutely about you. And I've got so many questions that I want to ask you. But we were born in Hong Kong. So my brother, not my blood brother, and I were born in Hong Kong. And my parents, who are from the United Kingdom, they went over to Hong Kong when it was a British colony. My mum worked for the NHS, my dad worked for an entrepreneur, and they couldn't have kids. And then adopted my brother and I. My brother 2 years later, so he's not my blood brother, but he is my brother in every sense of the word. And then we came across to the UK when I was 6, my brother was 4, and we grew up in the north of England, basically in Yorkshire. I don't know whether you know it, but we were like the only Chinese kids in school at the time. It's very middle class kind of white British. And I'm not sure about for my brother actually, but for me it was, I felt very conscious of being different. Whereas being in Hong Kong when we went to an international school, there was there's lots of different kids from different places and everything like that. So yeah, but I massively believe, I should say, in kind of serendipity and what is meant to be. And I'm just so lucky to have such an amazing multicultural kind of, how do I put it, open-minded family, if that makes sense.
And it's huge. Well, what a blessing. What a blessing. And I wanted you because I wanted to hear your story, and I wanted others to listen to that, because I could feel and sense the joy and the pride at the same time that you have for what you have right now. And I think some of what drives you as well. For me, I grew up in India, and we were about 20 people in a house. So it was always chaos. It was all kinds of crazy things, and I would trade nothing for it, because I tell my son this. I got 2 kids, Krish, who's 9, my daughter Kiara, she's 5. We would sleep on the terrace and watch the stars every single night. And my dad will tell stories at night, and and we would just take our sleeping bags up the stairs, drop it, and then in the morning we'll pack it up and come down. So it was like camping every night up on the terrace. But I remember I'm the youngest of all kids, and we had like 5 kids in the house. I was the youngest of all. And I feel like the idea of being rebellious, challenging the status quo, and trying to punch above your weight class on a daily basis to get what you want, or try to get what you want, or to compete, I think all that comes from just that nature. Because the school I went to, for example, all of my 4 brothers and sisters went through it. So by the time I got there, Leila, they were like, oh, so Sangram, you are so-and-so's brother who is the topper in the class. Your sister is great at sports. Your other brother, he is like incredibly nice and decent human being. Like nobody can be, better than him. So I got nothing. Like, I'm like, I can't even compete with like this. So I would just go in and be the most rebellious kids as possible, because I just wanted to create a ruckus and draw attention to me at that point. So I feel like some of that has carried over in a way where I would like, if everything is extremely calm, it actually drives me very insane. It makes me feel like there needs to be ripples of things around it. And thankfully, I think I've over the years, I hope I've transferred that nervous energy by seeing calmness and saying, well, why are there no ripples, to like using positive energy, saying there needs to be ripples of hope in the world. And through all the things that I try to do, I think that's what I try to create, is as many things as possible. If marketing is not working the way it should, let's challenge the status quo. That's what led to Terminus. If leadership is not working the way it should, maybe there's a better way. That led to the idea of the belongship. If podcasting is not working the way it should, maybe I should do live streaming. It goes back to the live streaming that I started to do. And so all these things, I feel like the basis really is being the youngest kid in the family allows me to like always think about, I need to challenge the status quo. And if it's too calm, it drives me crazy.
Thank you so much for sharing. I absolutely love that story. And it personally resonates with me a huge amount, because I think whilst I wasn't the youngest, having that rebellious, hey, I'm different, or you're feeling you're a bit, you stand out. And yeah, it's hard when you're young, because actually you kind of to a degree want to fit in. Not until you get older that you think actually, okay, hey, it's great to be different or whatever. But absolutely brilliant story there. And I can see this kind of this fire in your belly, and how this is almost culminated in you then being so driven to work in the various businesses you have and achieve what you have done, and then ultimately branch out on your own, which I think is wonderful. The entrepreneurial gene clearly runs very deep through the DNA, and I'm sure, actually, if you don't mind me saying so, I'm sure your brothers and sister now are kind of saying, hey, do you know what? Our Sangram, he's done pretty well.
Oh,
So
it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because my brother, like, he came to my book launch event, and he's like, I think we joked about it because my dad was a professor. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But he was a professor in college, economics professor, very well known, very well respected. And I remember I was, I think, in the 6th or 7th grade. And again, I was rebellious, so I wasn't really paying attention in the class. And he asked me to write a spelling of a word, and I completely butchered it. And he was like, you're the son of a professor and you can't even write a single word, like the small word that he asked me to write. And I was devastated. And my brothers, we were like, they were laughing their belly up like that. You know how brothers and sisters are. They're looking for moments like that to torture you for the rest of your life. And then he was at that moment where he was at the book launch, and he said, like, remember that day. And now look at it, Dad, in heaven was probably looking down and being proud. And I felt like, oh my God, like, how things move and how different things happen. It's an incredible life.
It absolutely is. You've encapsulated that there so incredibly well. And, I think when without being too deep here, when you look at life, actually, it's amazing to kind of look at how far you've come. I think sometimes it takes a big momentous occasion for that to happen, especially as an entrepreneur or someone who is as driven as you are, kind of looking back and saying, wow, I have come this far, and look, I'm very, very proud of that. Very easy, I think, just to be like, ooh, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Next thing. But actually, and before you know it, suddenly you're reflecting on the fact that, wow, you've done these 2 books, and you're running a great podcast, and all this kind of great stuff. But it is, I think, very much life is about this serendipity, and it's a bit like a labyrinth. You kind of, to a degree, never know which way it will take you, those twists and those turns and everything like that. But actually, looking back, it's quite exciting to see that, wow, if that hadn't have happened, that wouldn't have happened, and that did happen, and it was through that
100%.
meeting, and it's absolutely fascinating. So fast forwarding then, now in everything that's going on in Sangram's world, is we've got these 2 books, and we've got the organization, we've got the community. You talked before about how important this sense of community is to you, and that it is very much about the community and the feeling as opposed to the commodity side. Talk to us a little bit more about kind of the present day Sangram, and what is driving the organization, and some of, I suppose, the key pieces that you have learned about scaling the business with regards to marketing, and also, ultimately the interlinking of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the purpose-driven organization that you run.
Now, thanks for giving me the floor on that one for a little bit, because it's been interesting, because I've been having a lot more founder conversations in the last year than I've had in the first 4 years of Terminus. And just for everybody to know, we went from about 3 co-founders to about 250 people in the last 5 years. And in the process, ended up having this community of 100,000 plus people who are part of running, helping marketing and sales being just better. In your world and your way of saying is that just trying to have a difference in the way people market and sell. And it has been a game changer for many people. Personally, I feel like this community idea, that without a community, you're a commodity, which is a thing that I've said on every single podcast. Like, without a community, you're simply a commodity. I don't think we would have had built a organization of this size and scale without that. And of all the organizations that I meet and all the founders I meet, I ask them this very specific question, because they're all driven by this one idea that has been put in everybody's head. You got to have product market fit. You got to have product market fit. And I completely dismantle that, because I don't think that's really the truth there, because there's a difference there. And I ask them, what is your problem market fit? And when I ask that, I think majority of people, well, I don't know what that means. Well, it means that, have you tested that this is a real problem other than that it's your hunch? Like, tell me, how are you going to figure out this is a problem? Well, there's $1 billion market out there. I'm like, well, you don't have that $1 billion market. You don't have $1 billion. So let's not just make it $1 billion. Just because Uber exists doesn't mean every single type of business in that industry is going to work. That's okay. There's tons of stuff. Tell me how you're figuring out the problem. And the way companies, and I tell this to every founder I meet, is that go and validate the problem. The easiest way to validate the problem is if you put out and say, hey, I'm going to build a community around this niche, whatever that niche is. And if you see people saying, yeah, I want to be part of that, and you start putting events together, online, virtual, or physical, however that makes sense, and you start seeing momentum around that, now you know that you have a problem that you can solve. It doesn't even matter what the product was or what your idea is. Right now, you have figured out that this problem exists. And I can't tell you how many times people have tried that and said, I'm so lucky that I didn't go in that direction because nobody cared about that problem, but the problem was this. So now we're pivoting. So pivoting before building a product on the problem is extremely important, because once you set your mind on the problem, then the product will evolve. Then you're clear on the problem, and you could have multiple products. Like in our case, we acquired 3 companies in the last 5 years because we haven't changed the problem, but we have never fell in love with the product. We always fell in love with the problem that we're solving. So that allowed us to be so open to, all right, we need to acquire this company, we need to build this thing, we need to do that thing, because our eyes were always on the problem. And that is something I think most founders take a long time to think about.
I love the way that you articulate that. It's excellent. And you know what? I've never heard anyone describe it like that. Whether that is a UK thing or what, I don't know. But actually falling in love with the problem that you're solving, I think, is something that I am always going to remember. And I'm sure is very, very helpful as well to many of our listeners who are tuning in. I think that is absolutely key, because whilst it's about, this challenge, this issue that we are solving, also then interlinking that not only with kind of the purpose, which you're absolutely so incredibly passionate about, and something that then ultimately means something, because regardless whatever the subject matter might be, and obviously I'm passionate about diversity, inclusion and belonging, and of course you are very much so, but it is the problem we're trying to fix is very much about the fact there is a huge amount of inequality, across the board. And so forgetting about everything else, it makes complete sense, and it resonates massively that you're literally hanging this on what is the end goal, what are we trying to fix, and where are we trying to get to. And in a way, I can see that really not only puts it in perspective for these founders and other organizations you work for, but it really does help to guide you on that path, because if you don't see that path as to where you are going in terms of the issue, it's very hard to then, even though I'm sure the path, and it is in entrepreneurship, it's an emotional roller coaster, we all know that, wiggly worm all the way up to that issue. Actually, it's perfectly kind of encapsulated, simplistic, very hard hitting explanation. So thank you ever so much for that.
Yeah, one thing I would also add to that, Leila, was this idea, when we think about the problem, I feel what it would also do, and it's a huge byproduct side benefit that people forget, is, and that, because I think given what I heard from you before we started to hit record, was all the different things that you're involved in and the things that are feeding into each other, is that it's almost like freedom within framework, if that makes sense, right? Like it gives you a freedom to go and build any and everything that your customers would actually want and pay for. And that's really the ultimate notion. So when people think about product market fit, they immediately assume the problem exists, people are going to willing to pay, and as soon as we hit the market, the money's going to just start ringing in. Well, none of that stuff happens, and they look at it and they spend $1 million on it, and they waste investor money and their time, and then their ego, and like, well, I'm going to keep fixing the product. Well, what if the product is wrong? So that level of realization is so important. The problem, the community literally takes you. It's a huge byproduct is that now you're going to fill and create products that actually people are going to buy and sell. And oh my God, once you start making money, now you're in business. Otherwise, you're not in business. There are a lot of solo entrepreneurs right now who have entrepreneur, CEO of company and 100,000 followers and no business. And I'm like, you got to find a way to make money at some point. Otherwise, this is not going to work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is the biggest challenge of it all. Whilst also, as you rightly say, when you found it and you find that very, it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition between those two, doing good and making money. And, what's interesting about kind of the archaic leadership type piece, and many of the execs that I speak to, it's like, look, it's business, it's not personal. And I always say, well, it is personal.
It is personal.
It's not business, it's personal. It is personal. Actually, why can't you make a lot of money and also do a fantastic thing? Harnessing the balance between the two is the difficult challenge and the thing that we need to find. But it absolutely no shame whatsoever in wanting to make money and to be incredibly commercial. And I would say also culturally definitely much more easy to talk about that over in the States. Perhaps in the UK we're a little bit more, we don't talk too much about that as much, which is an interesting observation I have seen actually, because I'm married to an American. I'm married to an American as well, who, anyhow, I won't go into all of that because I'll tell you my life story. This is about you. But yeah, it's very, very interesting indeed, those cultural differences. But I think that is the shining star. That is the place we want to get to, is doing great business, but also making a significant difference in the wider world and within wider society. And so using that power of the influence to convert into something that actually has that tangible value.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise I feel like then we're preaching and that's it. So I feel like I look at this and I'm glad you brought that up. And if there's culture difference, I think ultimately you gotta, if I'm not able to provide for my family, everything I'm talking about is actually just trying to be putting myself on a pedestal that doesn't really, it can fall down any day as soon as is the weakest link I'm standing on. So I feel, and I've realized this, I would rather give more money away as a business than an individual, because I can actually give less than an individual if you really look at the math around that. So if I build a $100 million company, I can give 10, 20, $30 million out. I can have hundreds of people employed. Like right now, it makes me really happy that their families that their families are now making more money and having a better life because of whatever business that we started to jump in. So for every founder, every person, entrepreneur or every leader who might be listening to this, it's a great privilege to be able to make money and actually use that money to help families and do that, trying not to do that in the name of not like, for example, I'll give another example. You probably heard about Charity Water as an organization. It's a huge organization based here in New York, but obviously it's a global organization. Now, it's a nonprofit. And what's interesting is the CEO of the company, he actually started that with a clear business model, which means he said, look, there's no need for another water agency or a water nonprofit. There are hundreds and thousands of it. Then why did Charity Water actually become so good? Well, they reinvented the business model of nonprofit. Well, what's the problem with nonprofit? He said, look, people don't trust where the money is going on. There are people who get paid heavily in it. People feel like their money should go to charity directly, not to the people who are running it. So what they did was they built two businesses. One is 100% of donor money goes directly to the person, whoever they're trying to help impact. And they created the operating model, saying that the operating model will be funded by all the different entrepreneurs so that they make money at the operations. Their money making is coming from other funds, not from donor funds. And that changed the entire business model of nonprofits. And now the entire nonprofit organizations are starting to adopt a lot of that. So to me, the reason I share that example is because I feel like when you create the same three things, trust, safety, and care, it just opens up everything. So, oh man, I push people like people say, oh, I got 10 customers. I'm like, okay, how many of them are actually paying you? And they're like, well, not really, they're our first time customers. We're like giving them for free. I'm like, then they're not your customers. Show me someone who actually pays you money and they're not your friend or relative, then they are a real customer. So let's start there. So I don't know, I can go on a soapbox on that.
No, I absolutely, and do you know what? That is such a great example. I'm so glad that you shared it. And I think it is one that really flipped the charity model on its head. And absolutely that is to you and your brand, and what you've built is about challenging that status quo. And, you know, obviously with not only all the great work that you're doing, but with the work with the podcast, with Flip My Funnel. Talk to me about, I mean, you had some enviable guests on there, some brilliant.
It seems like you had better guests, like, you know, and I need to go back and look at the list now. But no, it's been fun.
You do. Talk to me about some of these guests, and to our listeners as well, because, you know, guys and girls and all who are listening in, I'd absolutely say, you know, I've listened to some of Sangram stuff. It's brilliant. It's high energy, as you would expect, because he's got a fair bit of energy, but it's high energy, it's inspiring. I mean, especially for me, I think, and again, maybe that is, you know, lots of eclectic individuals and wonderful individuals, from execs to entrepreneurs listening to our podcast. But for me, I think as an entrepreneur, really looking at the, you know, the zero to hero, that kind of scaling from swashbuckling pirates through to kind of, you know, cape on your back and an S on your chest, you know, it is brilliant. But talk to us a little bit about, you know, talk to us about some of the stories, because that was a great story that you shared there with, you know, with the charity piece, and actually the interesting challenge, well, not challenge, the challenging of the status quo that addressed, because it's not a typical charity model. Talk to us about some of your favorite podcasts, some of your favorite stories, because we all love stories, and I love listening to yours.
Yeah, all right. So we've done, it's a daily podcast, which is crazy as it sounds, but it dovetails into the community concept, because I only run once a week. The rest of the 4 days are run by the community. So that allows us to have incredible guests that just expands the entire horizon. It literally giving the mic back to the community and saying, hey, why don't you run some of it? And we call it the Tuesday takeovers, or like the events we do, we'll record the sessions and play them and say, this is a replay from an event. So all those things we do so that there's content all the time. But I typically interview just one a week to keep my own sanity around that. But some of my favorite guests has been Patrick Lenciani, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I had him right after COVID happened again. And he talked about this idea of being exceedingly human. And that really was interesting, because it's like, look, right now, with everything going on in the world, what you need to do is be more exceedingly human in almost every conversation you're having. Your team would not be upset if you called them and said, how are you doing? They will not be upset. Pick up the phone, talk to them. Your team won't be upset if you put 30 minutes on their calendar and said, hey, this is your 30 minutes. I want you to take a walk, or just go take a nap, or do whatever you need, not a meeting for anything else. The things that will make you exceedingly human would change the game for your team and your relationship with the organization. So I thought that was really, really fun one that we had on Flip My Funnel. The other one was with Whitney Johnson. Whitney Johnson wrote a book called Disrupt Yourself. And she came up with this idea that, hey, look, the first thing you got to do is disrupt yourself. Everything around your life is changing right now, but you are the same. Now that's a problem. If you want to really see everything around your life to change the way you want to, then you need to disrupt yourself. And I think it's hard teaching for people who are trying to just go with the wind and see where it lands. It's more of like, okay, I'm going to be intentional about making certain decisions, saying yes and no to certain things, and actually start making those choices. That is really hard for people to do. So I thought that was a fantastic one. I also had Daniel Pink, who wrote another Drive was another book. There's several other books wrote, but he talked about this idea of the world of work is going to completely transform if it hasn't already. People who thought they are never going to have business model, like remote business models, are going to all of a sudden find themselves having the best time. And of all these interviews and conversations that I'm having, I think the greatest learning, Leila, that I'm trying to have, or I'm getting out of it is, and it sounds harsh, and I think you mentioned that maybe before the recording or not, was at the end of this year, or like same time if we put a calendar invite for both of us to actually do another episode of this next time, this year, next time, we both are going to look back and probably say that was our best year ever. And it is hard given all the things going on around us. I have a ton of empathy for people who are probably struggling right now, and some people have their family members lost. And so I'm not trying to say, well, that's good, but obviously that's bad. But from a business perspective, people are going to come out of this so much more leaner, so much more stronger, and so much more adaptable to the new way of doing business, that they're going to come out more resilient than they've ever been. So I look at this as saying, oh my God, no bad thing should ever go unnoticed and not worked on. So a year from now, if you did another interview right now, you're going to tell me that your business doubled and you did some great things and your community doubled. I'm going to tell you the same things around our own things. And I think that's going to be true for a lot of people.
Let's book in a podcast and see what happens, because that would be absolutely fascinating. And I completely agree. I think it's, as an entrepreneur, you're always excited about the future, and clearly you are a glass abundantly over half full.
Yeah.
I am definitely a person who is glass half full. And obviously you are absolutely right. This is it's been a tragic time for many, many reasons, and obviously we have a huge amount of political unrest, which is of course happening at the moment, which is absolutely gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching. But where we possibly can, and of course we pay our respects to those having a very difficult time, which deeply saddens me. But I think you're absolutely right to say that this will make us into stronger human beings, where we can over communicate. There is no such thing as over communication. This is a time now where you cannot possibly ask too much. How are you? It's so simple. How are you? How are you doing? What's going on in your world? Having that personal touch, having that emotional, that empathy, that vulnerability, that ability to open our full true selves to the wider world and say, look, here if you need anything. It will absolutely make us more resilient for those forthcoming times that will be upon us and what will get us through. And interestingly, I suppose look at COVID. I think there will be this sea change, and then there will be this wave almost, and the wave washing out, with the tide, those that very sadly have whatever reason not made it, and not always course any fault of their own, but the ones that will remain and the ones that will stand strong are the ones that have really done as you say and communicated to their people, had that human touch, being, as Pat Lencioni said, be exceedingly kind, be exceedingly human. That is critically what matters. And so looking after our people and making sure these communities flourish as yours do. And I know you've got a fabulous following from around the world, and great people who are really engaged in it. But I really think it is that authenticity, and it is that true rawness and realness and ability to talk about the warts and all, as we would say in the UK, that really makes it something real.
And it's huge difference. And I think you said something that I want to just double click on. You said we would really ask, how are you? And I think the next phrase or next thing that I'll say then, and then actually genuinely care for the answer behind that. Because until this point, I think my how are yous were like, hey, how you doing? Good, right? Awesome, great. I mean, it's literally that, right? Or passing by, like, hey, doing great, man. Good to see you. And that's our normal thing. But now our boardrooms have become our living rooms. Like you just without even talking, but you actually know I've got a family, you got things, you know what my interests are. I got a huge unicorn of my daughter right sitting next to me.
Oh, I love it.
Right? You know so much about me just without even interacting. But when you're in the office, you don't see any of this. So we almost miss the other part of people when we say, bring your whole self to work. Well, I don't even know what your whole self looks like. But now I do. Now you do. Now everybody listening does. So like, okay, what the people are. So I feel like we're going to go deeper on like, well, how are you doing? How is your daughter doing? What's going on with your life? What's the latest thing happening? Like, I think we would actually care to know the answer of how you are in a much deeper way than we actually ever did.
I think you've got a very good point with the deepness of that connection, because for this crazy reason we've been thrown into a virtual world where, as you say, we've almost got this window into the soul of another
Yeah,
person
it's a good
living,
way to put
and
it.
what is happening. And yeah, it is. It absolutely is. You know, I've done, met with CEOs and being kind of chit-chatting over whichever platform it is, like we are now, and daughters on these, sons on these. You know, I was, oh my goodness, who's doing the live stream at our recent summit, and my very naughty dog Maud, who I thought had been locked out, started howling halfway through, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, you're live on Yahoo Finance right now! Get out!" But actually, it is. I think the lines, as you say, between business and between personal life are very much becoming blurred, and so completely nonsensical to not be human about what we ultimately are doing. No, and I guess that that leads me on with the sense of belonging and the kind of the true authenticity about how you go around kind of conducting yourself, the things that you do. You know, actually, what does diversity and inclusion and belonging truly mean to you? And I ask that question because I ask it to everyone who comes on the show, and it's interesting always to see the answers that we get back, because actually everyone is diverse to an extent, visible diversities, invisible diversities. What does D&I and B truly mean to you personally, Sangram?
As you said that, I was thinking about it, and I'd be curious to hear what others have said on it for sure. To me, it is the diversity of thought that really matters in the room. And if you don't have that, it doesn't really matter if you have diverse cultural representation in that room, because if everybody came from the same school and the same background and the same notion, or is subscribing to the same newsletters as you do, then they're all like just forwarding the same stuff to each other. So the bigger thing, and I feel like a lot of people are misconstruing this idea of diversity into like, well, we just need to have a female on the board. Well, why and who is super important in that. Of course you want it, but make sure that there is diversity of thought in it. And I think, and I'm seeing this reverse pattern of like people are just trying to check the box by having diversity, and it's going to come back and bite them really hard, because they're going to like, well, we did this, but I don't think any change. Well, because that person is really not diverse in thinking than you. So to me, that really comes down to diversity of thought.
Very well encapsulated there indeed. And I, just on that point, I think, you know, you're very right. When it comes to diversity, actually, it's interesting to see, and I've been many in a boardroom that when I'm talking about diversity and inclusion, you know, I sometimes feel this, I don't want to say rolling of eyes, but it's kind of like, oh, great. So maybe you're best speaking to my chief people officer, or someone else who might be of color or whatever. And I think, well, and then I spend my time then convincing them that actually, do you know what? Diversity, inclusion, and belonging relates to everyone. It relates to every single person on the planet, because we are all diverse. This is about, as you've completely rightly said, it's about the diversity of mindset, because without that diversity of mindset, we end up with groupthink, and having groupthink and the same mindsets with the same experiences around a boardroom table, where's the innovation? And clearly, I know from following you and stuff that you do, you've got a hugely diverse and international team there, and it is those diversities of ideas that ultimately, especially for an entrepreneurial swashbuckling organization that's grown from zero to hero, that literally it's that extra spice and that kind of that flair of the new ideas. I think I heard you before call it something that's like the magic that makes that that thing just happen.
Yeah, it is absolutely. It ultimately becomes your magic. Ultimately, your secret sauce really becomes that, because everybody knows that people is really what your secret sauce is, not the technology, it's the people. And if people do not have diversity of thought, it won't work. I'll give you an example of it. We talked about this just briefly, that in the last 3 years of our, so we've been there for 5 years now, since 2015, but in the last 3 years, we acquired 3 different companies. And we acquired a company like 3 weeks ago. And when I tell that to people, they're like, wait a minute, there's like so much unrest going on. This feels like the worst time to do this kind of things. And I look at this as going back to my, I think, looking at like chaos is a great thing. That just means that now I can be calm, because it's chaos out there, like in not in a negative way, but in a way like when people don't see opportunities, that's when I start seeing like, okay, there are opportunities that people are going to pass on. This is where we need to jump in. So I look at all of this as that diversity means that you truly can take certain risks in life that you probably won't if you are not surrounded by people that will push you in that. So some of these things happen because some of our investors would say, well, I'm not sure about that. Like, are you sure? Well, because they would not take that kind of risk. But then some of the other people on the team, they're like, that is absolutely the best thing because it's going to allow us to be on the magic quadrant of Gartner and Forrester. So they had this big aspirations around that, and they were in the trenches. So they cared more. They knew what customers want. You can't have, you need that tension. I call it the healthy tension in your organization. So if everybody around the boardroom or comments saying, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. You got a bunch of people just saying yes to you, and you need to fire them because that's not good for good business. Like, it really is bad for good business. You want people to say, hey, I'm not sure if that's a great idea, but if you commit, I'm going to commit to it and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it successful. So I'm not going to be passive aggressive about it, but I'm going to voice that that's not a great idea. And if I don't ever hear that, it spikes my signals up as like, well, we don't have diverse thought in this meeting. We don't know. We're not looking at the pros and cons. We will accept there's always going to be a pro and con, but we got to know, we got to talk about it. And if nobody's talking about the other side, we got something wrong here.
I love that you see opportunity in chaos. Absolutely. It resonates. I think, if not now, then when is one of my favorite expressions. And you think, it'd be interesting, you speak to, no disrespect to any of the management consultants out there. There's loads of fantastic ones and we love you. But, you hear these kind of management consultancy terms like, change maker, being a change maker and, pivot, blah, 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 blah. And you think actually with COVID and with those who are truly entrepreneurial and those true management consultants that talk the talk and walk the walk, look how quick the universe has pivoted off the back of things like COVID and other environmental disruptions in our world. It proves that it really can be done and that there are, change more. I think I was reading an article by McKinsey the other day, the change has been far more significant than it has been in the last 10 years. Literally, because, in the last couple of months. And so it proves it can be done, proves the entrepreneurial mindset that, thinking, umming and ahhing, I'm not saying it's not right not to be cautious and to be considered in our decision making. So obviously the impact is big, but to your point and to your energy there with like looking at this and going, well, not hallelujah, but oh my goodness, opportunities here in abundance. I absolutely get where you're coming from. It's the time to take those risks because what's the worst that can happen? Why not?
The opportunities that people have right now are so great. I mean, I'll like just, couple of other just very little quick examples. Advertising. People are saying, well, we should stop advertising. But guess what? Right now, if you're doing Facebook ads or whatever, different types of ads, there's abundant inventory at the lowest possible price that you can. It's almost like, the price of the gas station has gone down, right? People are not, paying the same dollar amount. It's the same for advertising. You're getting more access to more people, having more eyeballs on your ad or your message right now than it would ever for the next, 8-10 years again, until something else happens. So there's opportunity everywhere. There's opportunity in how you build businesses. There's opportunity for you to finally go and build that course that you want people to go. There's an opportunity for you to go and build a real small niche community around what matters to you. And nobody's going to say anything. Everybody wants to be part and want to belong to something. And I think to your idea of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, I think it's that at the core of everything.
It absolutely is indeed. I couldn't have said it better myself. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you know what is coming next, and that is a little lightning round before we wrap up for today. Because, and do you know what? There's a gazillion things I could ask you. So one, we are booking in a podcast this time next year, and two, we definitely are. I have really good energy that makes me feel we are going to meet again very, very soon. But let's go into the lightning round. And first and foremost, I'm going to ask you the biggest question first. And that is, what would you say is your secret to success?
I think I'll say energy is is the number one thing that I get to bring in every single day. Have my energy with me. If I don't have that, people can see it, people can feel it. You don't have to say a word. If you're down, up. If you're optimistic, not. And I think as leaders, energy is something we need to bring in everything. And now you don't need to be rah-rah and like over the top if that's not your personality, but you got to bring in a certain level of energy in every conversation.
Great answer. And who's been the biggest inspiration in your life? It could be someone in business, it could be someone personal, it could be anyone. Who's really inspired you to make a difference in the world?
Yeah, I would definitely say my wife. A lot more in almost every extent of it. I think she will tell me when it's not right, when I don't think anybody else would. And she would, I mean, there have been times we had been in a rough spot as a couple because of my over attention to certain things. And so recently, one of the things I've done is like, I would switch off my phone at 7 p.m. on Friday and won't pick it up until after church on Sunday. And that is a necessary break for me to shut down and be present in the moment because of how go my mind works. So things like that, she never asked me to do that, but I know things I need to do that. Without her channeling the energy and looking the good in me, I don't think I would have actually done some of the things I've done.
I'm sure she's absolutely fantastic, your wife, and that downtime, so important. I think that entrepreneurial brain, likewise, I drive my poor husband crazy most of the time, talking shop, as we say in the UK. but yeah, absolutely so important to have that downtime. So that, your wife sounds fantastic, and it's like that yin and yang piece where actually you need someone who's to balance out and to help you maneuver into where you need to be to get that downtime. And I also wonder, obviously other than this podcast, but are there any podcasts that are particular favourites, or indeed books or authors, other than those that you've obviously mentioned that have been favourites on the show, that you're reading at the moment that you think are particularly inspirational, that could be great reading, collateral, blogs, material for our listeners?
Yeah, there's one that I keep it here because I read it like over and over again. This is by Donald Miller. It's called StoryBrand. And it's really interesting because he's a marketer, but he's really helping companies tell better stories, especially B2C companies. And it has this framework is about talking about how almost every single movie, the reason you've watched that movie is because of that 3-sentence blurb that you see on Netflix. You say, I want to know what happened. Right. And I think that's really the crux of storytelling. Like you're at the edge of the seat when you want to hear what's going on. And I want that. So there's it's so interesting is like, well, from the time of Jesus to now, like this is how storytelling has done. And it's a really fascinating framework that applies to almost every story part of business, marketing, sales, movies. So I'm like fascinated by that. And his podcast is pretty good too.
Brilliant. It's now on my list as well. We'll put it in the show notes as well if you didn't manage to write that down in time. Thank you very much for that. And what about any advice? So by advice, to those that are listening in, whether they be entrepreneurs like ourselves, or whether actually they are leaders working for large organizations or leaders at the beginning of their epic careers, what would be one or two key pieces of advice or nuggets of wisdom that you can impart with those who are tuning in today?
Yeah, well, I'll share that. Look, I mean, I've seen my dark side of overworking, over trying to deliver and overdoing something. And I've gone that. And I think it happens to probably all of us when you are like so driven by something and you need to really slow down. And I think COVID and all that stuff have made us all slow down in some ways. What I've found myself in this time, especially in the last couple of years, is to very clearly define a picture of success. And what I mean by that is not your vision statement or your mission statement or financial outcome that you want, but a truly personal picture of success. So if you're a business, let's say your picture of success is like, I want to be a $10 million business that that's not inspiring. That actually makes things smaller. But if your picture of success is like, well, I want to see our company be at the New York Stock Exchange with a mallet, like now you have a picture that you can have your organization drive to it. So creating a true mental picture for you and your team. Same thing for our family. For example, our family is Vajres always make it through with God's love, grace, and truth. So for us, it is 20 years from now when our kids are a little bit older and they're out of the house and they would live their life with grace and truth in everything they do. That's our picture of success as parents. So having a clear picture of success is, I couldn't stress the importance of that. That will give you a North Star in everything you do.
That is so inspiring, and it is so very, very true. Sharing a little piece here with you, which drove my husband crazy for a while, had a whiteboard at the end of our bed. He's now been moved into another room. I wake up in the night and
I've never heard having a whiteboard by the end of your bed. Like, whoa, you take the cake on that.
Well, I wake up in the night and I'm like, oh my God, there's this idea, and it's burning away inside. I have to write it down, and you kind of take it to a further level. And I did this a year before we ended up moving into the home that we're in now, and we'd love to have kids. We haven't had kids yet, but writing on there what happiness looks like, or as you've articulated there, what actually, what does success look like, and feel it, see it, envision it. It's so powerful, and it happens. I know it sounds so pie in the sky, especially for the lovely Brits, and I love those in the UK. So maybe it's slightly American actually in a way. It's very, you picture this thing and it actually comes into reality, but it massively does. Visualization is so powerful.
Like every single notebook I write, I have my mission statement written. So every time I open my notebook, every 10, 20, whatever notebooks, I will go and spend time writing it down, visualizing it is a huge part of almost prophesizing it and saying like, this is where I want to go. It really helps you, again, go down that narrow path that you want to go.
Totally, and it feeds perfectly back to what you're saying right at the beginning of the podcast around looking at where the organization, whether it's personal life, whether it's business life, looking at where the organization is going. The challenge you're trying to solve, it is that North Star, as you explained there. Start with the end in mind almost. Where do you want to then get to? And you build that path and you see it and you build in that direction. And finally, I must ask before we wrap up for today, if you could go back and give the young, rebellious Sangram some advice back when you were, I don't know, perhaps first coming to the US, or leave in India, or back in the early days, what advice might you give to your younger self, or indeed someone who perhaps is in a similar circumstance at the moment?
I probably would say it's a marathon, not a sprint. So take it easy, breathe, spend some time, take some time, work hard as you possibly can. I think I could probably have worked harder, quite honestly, in the earlier days, but it's a marathon, which means that you need to pace yourself. You need to think about things not in days and months and years, actually sometimes in decades, to say what you want it to be. And I think as we grow and mature, I just turned 40 last year. So
you don't look it, by the way.
Say again?
You don't look it, by the way.
Look like 40. Well, I don't know. I'm
No, you don't look it. You look younger. You look younger. I meant that as a compliment. So
yeah, that's great. No, I take it. I appreciate that. And I feel like, well, as I look at my next chapter in life, I feel like I'm in my 20s again. I feel like I'm reinventing myself again. But I'm just realizing that it's a marathon. It's not and I'm a huge fan of just writing my own eulogy, which sounds pretty morbid in a way, but it's true. Nobody's going to ever say, oh, Sangram was a great guest on Leila's podcast. I don't know. They might say at any other thing, they will never say he was the CEO of a company or founder of this and that. They're going to say, if they say, is that, well, Sangram was a kind person. He was helpful. He inspired me. He made a change in my life, right? Those are the things that everybody says at funerals. So I think it's very important to think about that. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Be kind, be generous, be thoughtful about certain things. but it's a marathon. It's a longer race than what people think in years and decades. We just think that it's ending like tomorrow, and it's actually not.
Such powerful stuff. Such powerful stuff. Sangram, thank you ever so much indeed for being here. It's been a joy. I was very excited about today, actually. Sorry, I'm showing my geeky side, but I really was very excited about having you on the show today. So thank you ever so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And hopefully this inspired one person that was listening to this.
I love your modesty. You know, I think it would have inspired many, many people. That one person which you're very modestly saying, I can tell you there's definitely one person, that is me. And I mean that absolutely fundamentally. I'm a very big fan. I think what you're doing is great. I think, as I always do at the end of podcasts, I do a summary of key learning pieces, and I normally take notes, and I have taken notes, and actually I can say it off the cuff, and that is, look, I think what I have certainly learned is, think big. You can never think too big. You can never take too many, I don't want to say risks, but I think, there is an opportunity in every single, the murkiest of murky clouds in the universe. There is a silver lining. Sangram will definitely find it. So looking at those silver linings wherever possible, there's always going to be terrible things happening in the world, but actually being human, being kind, being positive where we can, and looking at, those that matter and those that care who are around us. Because like you say, that the eulogy piece, whilst it perhaps does sound a little morbid, I think it's absolutely critically true, is reflecting back is something perhaps we do not do enough. And, I think that you said at the end was particularly powerful, because it's time to take a breath and time to take a breather. And if those who are listening in, and certainly myself, running off at 1,000,000 miles an hour, feeling like a little hamster, rolling around and kind of boom, 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 boom in the wheel, actually, the time to breathe and to reflect and look at how far we've come up the mountain as opposed to how far we have to go is critically important. Not only to keep us motivated, but I think also to keep us clear on what is actually important. As you say, I mean, who knows, maybe it does say Sangram was a great guest on Leila's podcast show on your gravestone, but I'm sure it won't. Actually, it's more likely to say, this person, Sangram, was kind, he was dedicated, he really did the best that he could for his family and his wider community. And so, I've learned an awful lot. I think being challenging to the status quo is absolutely key. And I think also, kind of not being scared to take those next steps, especially within difficult times. Don't go necessarily with the crowd is something I've learned from this. Don't be a sheep or don't be a lemming, as the kind of, the old school Microsoft game that I used to love. Don't be a lemming. Actually, those times of challenge and change are often the times where the biggest opportunities can come around. So make the most of those. And belongingship, I have heard you say it before, but I think it's fantastic terminology, because actually no one else other than yourself really says belongingship. And belongingship about the community is something that I think is terribly important. Community, not commodity. And making sure that you show that true kindness, that empathy, that vulnerability. It's it's what makes you real. And people ultimately, at the end of the day, Sangram, and I say this from personal experience, they buy into you. They buy into you and what you stand for and the challenge you're trying to solve, as opposed to the the peripheral around the edges. So anyhow, I bleated on for long enough. There were many key learning points. For those that are listening in, my name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show with you every week, but we're here twice a week at the moment because of uncertain times. You've been listening to Sangram Vajre. You can check out all this great work. If you missed anything, if you missed the book title that he showed or any of the key pieces of learning, don't worry at all. All of that will be in the show notes for the end of today's show, and you can check that out at www.dialglobal.org/podcast. We're also giving away a 7-day free community membership as well, so love to be able to welcome you into that as well. So we'll look forward to seeing you very, very soon. And Sangram, thanks ever so much again for being here. First thing I'm going to do when we get off this podcast is book in a time on the same date for next year, if that is cool.
Let's do that. Let's do that. It will be epic to post it, to see it and have it and then appear. Oh my God, like here we are. And we should watch this episode before we do that and just laugh out loud.
Absolutely. Challenge accepted. I'm literally putting that in. So 5th of June, 2021.
There you go.
See you again very soon.
Do it.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me.
And bye for now. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.